This is Hazeltop and the Scale, written and read by John Gulick. I hope you enjoy. Chapter 1. Gil slipped into the mass of students bubbling outside Hazeltop's gate. He didn't wear robes or furs as some of the others did. His shirt and pants were plain but well kept, and his cloak was a dark, fine green. He pulled it closer as a tall, dark-haired boy joined him. "I'm Hammond," the boy said. "Hammond Oatley. What's your name?" "Gil of Evervale." "I've never met an Evervale before," Hammond said. Gil smiled. "It's a town." "Really? That's a strange name." "It's from a story," Gil explained. A gleam caught Hammond's eye. "Do tell." "You must have heard the Heartscale tale before," Gil said. "Sure," Hammond said, "but there's no Evervale in the story." Gil frowned. "The whole thing is an Evervale." An old horse tugged an apple cart past them. Gil wondered how many times it had passed a new band of students at the gates of Hazeltop, waiting for the term to start. The driver grinned toothily and threw a dozen apples into the crowd. "Them's was cider apples, anyway." Hammond was watching Gil curiously when he turned back from the apple cart. "I'd like to hear it." He had ridden by wagon for days to reach Hazeltop, and the company had been dry as corn husks. Hammond was a welcome change. Gil cleared his throat and drew up the familiar story. They lived in the valley, and it was veiled from the world. The town was hidden from every road, map, and traveler. Many families lived in the village, and each filled their role, whether it be woodsman, cook, or gardener. As generations passed, the town learned many secrets. They learned every leaf of the forest. No animal tracks were a mystery to them. They befriended the great creatures. One day, a traveler discovered the village. He had journeyed far and seen much, but the ways of the valley were new to him. He was welcomed by the people, and though they spoke different tongues, they traded many secrets. The traveler learned of woodcraft and herbs. He taught them to use stone and iron which they had feared. The village showed him a dragon's den, and he swam with the Yael. He crafted tools of iron. Still, there were many things he could not explain, and as the seasons passed, it seemed there was one secret they would not share. So he followed the elder, past the pool, into a cave deep in the forest. In the cave was a cauldron of smooth, worn wood. The traveler watched from the trees as the elder added plants and saps, chips of stone, and a measure of water. The elder spoke, and the cauldron seemed to glow. The elder ladled the potion into bowls and returned to the village. The traveler inspected the cauldron. Oddly, some potion remained. He noticed a bowl forgotten beside the cauldron. He took the bowl. The village's final secret lay before him, but it was not enough to merely taste it. The traveler dropped a ring of iron into the cauldron and spoke the elder's word. A sharp jingle of keys interrupted Gil. Pardon me," an old man called as he wobbled through the crowd of students, carrying a ring of keys that seemed to clink much too loudly. He wore an ill-patched tunic of indeterminate color. Gil couldn't be sure, but there seemed to be a bit of smoke coming from the man's ear. He reached the gate and fumbled with his key ring. Students cheered as the man bumbled at the gate, and Gil smiled apologetically. "Better save the rest of the story for another time." "I've never heard it start like that. I'll be curious to see how it ends," Hammond said. "You must be in alchemy, then." "Yes," Gil said with a smile. It seemed surreal. He had finally reached Hazeltop and was minutes from registering for classes. Hammond winced. "Tough application, I've heard. I only had to read a few enchantments from the examiner's book. As soon as I read Crazarume, a mushroom wiggled behind Hammond's back and suddenly shot skyward into an odd, lumpy chair. Hammond grinned widely. "You get the idea." Gil gaped. "You're an enchanter? Could I use that spell?" "Training to be," Hammond said. "From what the examiner said, most everyone can do magic with some training, but not every kind of magic. I expect if you've got the knack for alchemy, the other branches will give you some trouble." There was a bang of iron at the gate, and the old man grunted. Hammond chuckled. "Sounds like he's sieging a castle." Gil grinned. The man poked the gate's lock with each of his keys to no avail. After several seconds of prodding and muttering, he gave up and patted the many pockets of his tunic. A wizened, crooked apple core emerged. He grinned toothily and inserted the core into the lock. There was a click, and the gate swung open. Students cheered. The gray, plump man seemed genuinely impressed. He returned the apple core to his pocket and patted it protectively, turning to the students. "Call me Trent, if you like," he said, pulling a note of crisp paper from another fold in his tunic. "Now, Master Vale has a few words for you before you get official with your classes." He squinted at the paper and gave another toothy grin. "Now, how about someone reads this?" His crooked finger swiveled across the crowd, freezing as it landed upon Gil. "You!" The bottom fell out of Gil's stomach as 100 heads started turning. He looked down. Everyone would be watching him. The feeling left his legs. It seemed even the enchantments protecting Hazeltop could not dispel his fear. He took a wobbly step back before all those spinning faces could find him. But he need not worry. "Gladly," Hammond called to Trent, stepping between Gil and the old man. He closed the distance to Trent swiftly. "On you go, then." Trent made to offer the note, but the parchment was gone. His face wrinkled in surprise when Hammond opened a hand where the parchment already lay. Hammond winked to the chuckling crowd and read clearly, "A message from Master Vale. Welcome to Hazeltop. Let this school become your home as it is mine. Today you will register for your first term classes and receive a room in the Flask. In the coming days before term begins, I encourage you to make full use of campus and begin bonding with your peers. The way of magic is winding and is best walked with company. I look forward to addressing you on the green prior to classes." Hammond handed the note back to Trent. "That's it?" Hammond nodded, and Trent turned back to the students. "That's it. On you go to the registration tent just up the hill there. Remember, gate locks at—" But his words were lost in a swell of scuffling boots and excited voices as students streamed past him, up the gradual slope toward the white complex of tents squatting beside the road. Inside, Gil saw desks, ledgers, and registrars waiting with pen and parchment. Several of the passing students called out to Hammond or shook his hand. He smiled and joked. Then, with a turn of his tawny cloak, he disappeared into the crowd. Gil tried scanning the swirling robes and cloaks, but it was as good as counting bubbles in a soup pot. He wondered if his friend had vanished as soon as he'd appeared. Then, Hammond slipped through the forest of cloaks, robes, and pelts. He clapped Gil on the shoulder as the line squeezed through the gate. "Trent was some alchemist, you know. Great brewer, but not a whit of sense," my sister said. "Mistook a potion for a bottle of cider and drank the whole thing, if you can believe it. Thought he was going mad when he started hearing voices. Gatekeeper ever since." The stream of students wound toward the registration tent farther up the path. The air tasted of cider. A girl climbed atop a stump beside the path and drew a lute. Her hair was the warm brownish red of a log against the coals. A black dog sprang from the crowd of students and sat beside her stump. She strummed the opening chords. A murmur went through the line, and Gil heard the Heartscale tale. He smiled. The only thing better than telling a story was hearing one. The din of conversation faded as students elbowed and shushed each other. She sang and played beautifully, but Gil's excitement soured with each passing line. The story was wrong. He wondered if he had misheard the students, or if they had been mistaken. Her song was not in Evervale. There was a family, not a village. The father grew sick, and the mother brewed a potion in a cauldron of iron. For a moment Gil saw story and song overlap, but the potion did not save the old man, and the song ended in low, sad chords. It was a lovely song, but it was not the Heartscale tale as Gil knew it. There was a span of silence before a piper sprang up beside the lutist. A jolly tune danced into the summer air. The moment passed, and Gil pointed up the hill eagerly. Silk stretched between poles to create a huge registration tent that was steadily receiving the line of students. Registrars sat behind desks covered in ledgers and parchment, questioning nervous first years about the upcoming term. Gil shook away his thoughts of the song and pulled a scrap of parchment from a pocket in his cloak. Alchemy, herb lore, wondercraft, defense, gardening, his tidy script read. There was no real need to consult the parchment. He had dreamt of these classes for months, ever since passing the examiner's test. He followed Hammond to an open desk. A stern, pinch-faced enchantress waited for them, her hair scooped into a tight bun. "Name?" "Hammond Oatley." "Classes?" "Enchanting, roots and fungi, defense, and I'd like to write for the top tail." A quill jumped up from the desk and began scribbling in the enchanting ledger. The woman eyed him. "Top tail?" Well, write an article for Master Ariana before classes start. She'll decide if you're better at writing papers or delivering them. Gil felt nervous for the tall boy. The quill scratched a final note beneath Hammond's name. Very well, the woman said. Your registration is complete, and you'll receive a class schedule tomorrow. Make your way to the Flask for dinner. Is this your roommate? Hammond blinked in surprise and turned to Gil. It was clear Hammond hadn't considered a roommate. For all Gil's considerations of the school, neither had he. He would need friends here, in this world of magic and mystery. Hammond seemed to be thinking the same. He seemed hopeful, but there was a hesitance in his smile, as though he were going against his better judgment. A roommate could be nice. Gil offered his hand. I won't start a fire if you don't. Hammond laughed and shook Gil's hand. I'll do my best. Excellent, the woman said, and the quill danced over to the housing ledger. Name and area of study, dear? Gil's cheeks reddened. He was small for his age, and people seemed to make a point of emphasizing it. His hand found the parchment in his cloak. Gil of Evervale, and I'd like to study alchemy for starters. Could I also take herb lore, wondercraft, and defense? Gardening for my work study? Of course you'll be in alchemy and herb lore. Can't have you mixing potions with plants you can't even name now, can we? Everyone takes wondercraft and defense. Best beef you up a bit before the final exams, though. Gardening. The ledger beside her flopped open, showing a page of names and figures. I'm afraid it's full, dear. Most gardening applicants in years. What's your next choice of the work study? Full? Alchemists were supposed to apprentice as gardeners. Gil's mom and dad were bakers, and even they knew gardening was vital for the alchemy students. He racked his brain. He hadn't bothered to research the other work study options for alchemists. The only one he could think of was cauldron cleaning. Yes, quite full, my dear. There's herbalism, procurements, bottlecraft, pewter works. She frowned. Well, pewter works might be a little too rough for a boy like you. His cheeks burned a cauldron bottom red. He knew that these apprenticeships were nearly alchemy, but they missed the heart of it. Alchemy was creation, a transformation of ordinary into extraordinary. Alchemy students apprenticed as gardeners because it modeled the principles of alchemy itself, the power of time, forethought, and meticulous care. As the thought came to him, he knew where he could work. How about the kitchens? Hazeltop was wonderful, Gil thought as they left the registration tent. He finally had a full view of the massive school atop the hill. Towers, domes, archways of dark wood. Squat buildings hunkered between graceful towers. Trees interspersed the campus. In their windows, Gil saw students carrying books and oddments. The breeze was heavy with honey and sap. He couldn't help but smile. We made it. They made their way up the road and crested the hill. Here the path broke into a dozen branches. Students milled about, laughing and eating snacks. A plump woman wearing a fur-lined robe led a huge creature down a side street. Students scuttled out of her way, and Gil saw a curious pack collecting in her wake. He couldn't blame the followers. The creature was big as any 3 cows, with a coat of prickly hairs over a rough hide. Its mouth hung open near the ground, and Gil was surprised to see a mouthful of loose stones rather than teeth. Gil consulted their map. It looks like the Flask is higher, near the center of campus. We're in room 107. As they continued on Hazel Street, Gil was amazed to find Hazeltop more of a city than merely a school. They passed the Dragonry first, a tall, twisting tower with gaps along its length. Birds circled the tower, passing through the wide openings. The library was a pale dome without windows or even a door, as far as Gil could see. A signpost identified the hemisphere as the Egg. Foot trails and clipped grass paths branched off the main path, racing past forges and shops. Cobblestone streets sprouted from the ground, seemingly at random. Gil found someone airwalking between 2 trees as though on a bridge, though none was visible. They found the Flask to be an oddly shaped building, round and squat at the base before tapering upward to a single room at the highest floor. Music rolled through the front door. A lutist, and a good one, Gil thought. The singer's voice carried over the crowded dining room and into the street. I wonder what's burning tonight, Gil said. Hammond seemed puzzled, then smiled. Ah, food. We better get some before it's gone. We can drop our bags off at room 107 after dinner. Gil followed him inside. The room was torchlit and packed with small, round tables laden with platters. A server passed, carrying a tray of bread and roasted chicken. This was too good to be true. Do we just sit? He asked. Looks that way, Hammond said, and they sat in the corner near the stage. The lutist was the same he'd seen earlier beside Hazel Street. She must have just started playing. She looked to be Gil's age, though she wasn't worried about playing before the sea of students in the dining room. The handsome black dog sat beside her. What'll it be tonight, Kings? Braised chicken or potato soup? The speaker was a brown-haired serving boy with an open face. He produced a pair of mugs. Cider or water for the future wizards? They ordered ciders and soup with a loaf of garlic bread. As the server returned to the kitchens, he passed by a thin, bearded man in a vest and apron. An iron brooch gleamed against his vest. Must be the master of food, Purius Drayborn, Hammond said, as the lutist finished her song to a round of cheers. My sister said he ran the kitchens like a battle master when she was here. Doubt time softened him. This information did not bode well for Gil's upcoming time in the kitchens. What does your sister study? She studied alchemy. Gil straightened. Could I meet her? Get an idea of what to expect this term? Hammond swirled his cider. She'd be happy too, but her days with alchemy are behind her. The lutist began another song. Her voice was crisp and clear as Nevervale morning, and her hands were sure on the strings. She finished with a flourish and packed her lute into a wooden case. A curly-haired piper replaced her beside the hearth, shrilling out a wobbly tune once again. The server returned with bowls of thick soup and warm bread. Gil was famished after weeks of travel fare. As he was emptying his second bowl, the lutist dog appeared beside him, looking hopeful. Ash likes you, a voice said behind him. The lutist sat with them. I'm Millie. Gil, he returned, and this is Hammond. We just registered. Are you a student as well? Already started my work studying music, as you can hear. Can't wait for my runes class to start. I have the silver stylus and everything. I'm not much for music, Hammond grinned and tapped his throat, but I do have my pipes. All an enchanter needs. All an enchanter needs, Millie stressed, is a brain. She turned to Gil. You must be in alchemy. What gave it away? Nothing, she smiled. It's all the ingredients you have stowed in your cloak. Ash is going crazy. It was true. The dog had turned his attention from the soup to Gil's cloak, sniffing over lumps and pockets. Gil pulled the cloak closer. They're just some oddments I've collected for the term. An alchemist is always prepared. Millie smiled. Someone's been listening to tales about the Hartscale family. That reminds me, Gil said, the song you were singing earlier, that isn't really how the story goes. Millie frowned, but Hammond knocked his third bowl, now empty, against the table with a satisfied thump. He tore off a chunk of bread and turned to Millie. Find any secrets around Hazeltop yet? Millie drummed her fingers. They'd hardly be secrets if I told you. I did find a blocks tournament every afternoon at Third Bell, though, over by the Hall of Runes. Brilliant game. There's the thicket, of course, for any magical plants or beasts you have to study. I found... Do they have dragons there as well? Hammond interrupted. Millie's face was incredulous, though she avoided Hammond's eyes. You two are up to your nose with nonsense. Have you ever seen a dragon? Sounds like you have, Hammond said. Drakes, yes, but an adult dragon. Millie trailed off, and she smiled sheepishly. Well, I may have heard one once, in the mountains. Its voice was like a lute strung with lightning. They passed the rest of dinner in a warm stupor, imagining the distant dragon and listening to the stumbling piper in the crackling hearth. Millie took a bowl of soup, and Ash licked out another. The server returned with a blackberry pie, courtesy of Master Drayborn. The master nodded to them and slipped back through the kitchen door. Apprentices whisked away their plates and mugs. Gil looked between Hammond and Millie. Any plans for tomorrow? I'm heading down to Grant, Hammond said, immediately. Need a spell book and some things before class. Millie ruffled the dog's ears. The Silver Smoke Lake is calling us tomorrow morning, and I'm playing blocks in the afternoon. I even heard a few masters might be playing, and right before class will be the welcoming. The welcoming? Gil asked. Hammond rose from the table. A ceremony to kick off the term, food and magic. Master Vale will say a few words, probably tell us to keep out of the dragonry. The Master of Hazeltop. Wonderful, he said. I still need my cauldron. Could I come with you tomorrow, Hammond? Of course, that's what roommates are for. Gil smiled and grabbed his travel sack. Maybe we'll see you tomorrow, Millie? She laughed. You will.